So this was kicked off partially interest for me. I recently went to the NGConf, that meetup, and I actually was one of the speakers at the Hack Night there, and I was talking to, I don't know if any of you guys know Dave Smith, who works at HireVue, he's the director, and he came to our very first meetup here, but hasn't come to any since then. But he was a speaker at that as well, and I started, kind of wondering, director, but you're still giving technical talks, and I kind of asked him, have you found that's been really hard for you? And he didn't necessarily have great answers, and I didn't necessarily have great answers, and it's something I've struggled with at my last job, as I went from an individual contributor to a manager to a director, and then here I started back over to individual contributor back to a manager, and it's like, how much is too much? And so I'm starting with some of my thoughts and a couple of links out to a few other articles, but I'd love to hear what you guys think and kind of what your philosophies are as we go forward. So it starts with this, and this is kind of the first question I think a lot of people ask, is even should I still be writing code? And there's a Simpsons episode where Reverend Lovejoy says this to Ned, and he says, short answer, yes with an if, long answer, no with a but. And I think that's appropriate here. So, it really just depends. So I started listing out factors of if you should be coding. Now obviously, in the land of a really tiny shop, everyone's wearing 17 hats anyway, so it'd be hard to say, well, I just manage people, but you have one person on your team, and he's doing the work of 3 people, how many developers, that kind of stuff. And I like this one, can you afford to spend time programming? So if you have a lot on your plate, if you're managing 15 direct reports, can you afford to spend time programming at all? And then lead the analysis. Can you afford to not spend time programming? Is it even worth it? Of course, if suddenly everything's about to hit the fan, it's sometimes nice to jump in and help out, wherever you can, whether that's in QA or developing. And of course, that one I've known some technical managers who honestly couldn't program their way out of web paper sack. Maybe that's fine, depending on your org or who you are. Should you even be programming? Do you know how to remember how to program? So the short answer is I think there's a lot that's involved in how much you should be programming and even if you should be programming. So I set up some meetings with the CTO here, because it's like I've started thinking, okay, my career plan, I want to move up and become a director, and I'm saying my long-term career goal for 15 years is I want to be the CTO of a company. So okay, I don't feel like I had some great mentorship, so I sat down with him and I said, okay, as you've moved up to CTO, what kind of stepping stones? And he said something that was really kind of profound to me about this idea that as you move up the ladder, the things you do are really a subset of what you were doing before plus some other things. And that just kind of keeps going. And so I kind of built this little chart that I think, is this idea. And I've kind of, done it across what I consider a normal-ish sized organization of, okay, you've got a developer, now you put a manager in the pile. Now a heavy overlap in my mind in that a manager should still be able to do everything a developer does, but he also has some extra responsibilities. You throw a director on there, and obviously how much these overlap is going to be heavily dependent on your organization and what you think is important, but I think there's still overlap. Now as you start getting into the VP land, well, that probably doesn't overlap with developer at all anymore, and it probably shouldn't. And then obviously CTO doesn't really even overlap with responsibilities of manager. However, if you were to go work at Microsoft or Google, there'd be 6 more levels in the middle of this. In a different shop, there's less. Something more like this. I've worked at a lot of shops where this was really all there was. When I worked at Backcountry, for instance, I reported to a lead, and then there was the CTO, and that was the whole company. So obviously our leads wrote tons of code. Even our CTO was hacking the code base, because he should. And honestly, there are some shops where it's this, right? So you kind of have to do all those pieces. So I think that's kind of the number one thing I think about, is look at the size of your org and if it makes sense, and how close are you to the front line as you go forward. That being the case, I think this is really important, and I read a whole bunch of articles on this. So here are some of my ideas, and then I want to kick off to a few articles I've read. And again, I'm just trying to kind of feed the discussion here, but I'd love to get some thoughts from you guys. I really think it's important that you, at least at the first level of manager or lead, to still be in the code. And at my last job, we started encouraging our leads to get out of the code more, and I think it was a mistake. Looking back on
why that I've heard that where a manager will say, stop writing code.
Yeah.
Was there a rationale behind that one?
Well, and part of it is because a lot of the time the managers come from the front lines. And a lot of the time they only went into management because they wanted to make more money or they wanted to get to the next level of their career, which their company didn't have anything past senior software engineer. It was just like, oh, I want to make more money, so I have to be a manager now. And so what you find is somebody who is really, really good at writing code, who's now a manager, who often has received zero mentorship on how to become a better manager, who doesn't know how to be a good manager, who feels really like he's not contributing anything because his contributions aren't as easily to see. And that's maybe a whole other conversation around how to know if you're actually being successful as a manager, because when you're a programmer, I wrote 20,000 lines of code, or I fixed 17 bugs. It's really easy to measure success, and it's harder as a manager. So I think part of the motivation is just stop doing the thing that you know how to do really well and kind of jump outside of your comfort zone. And just skipping ahead a little bit, but in this article from Rand's and Repo's blog, I don't know if you've ever read any of his stuff, but he has one of my very all-time favorite books on like technical management. But so, in his book he talks about, this is his number one thing. He says, stop coding. And he tells you all the reasons you should stop coding. Can you manage? You're no longer responsible for yourself. And then he stops and he says, it's really good advice, isn't it? And then he says, well, actually, no. It's terrible advice. And it's sort of like, if you follow him like long-term, like earlier in his career when he was writing some of his books, he's like, yeah, you need to stop writing code, you need to be a manager, and he's really kind of come full circle in his like perspective over the course of his own career. And that's, I believe, especially at the manager level, it's really, really important to, stay involved. The other way I think it's really easy to not lose perspective on this is code reviews. And I think those are really important. I recently, I don't want to say I told everybody we were doing code reviews. I actually asked them all first if they were okay with it, but then we started doing them. And it's been really good, especially for me, in some of the areas that I'm not as technically strong in, but it's helped me to kind of stay in the mix a little bit. So this is one of the other ones that Rand talks about I'll bring up is make sure that you don't stop working on things that matter completely as a manager. I think it's important to own some things, but at the same time, don't take on the really important things. So if there's some big deadline, don't be the guy who's owning the feature that's for that really important deadline. Because what will happen is you'll spend 6 hours in meetings that day, and it's due by the end of the day, and now you're there until 2 a.m. The other part of that is don't take the fun stuff. I think that's really important as a manager, is to remember that really, service-oriented leadership kind of models is you're really trying to reduce the roadblocks for the people on your team. You want to get them and make them excited about what they're working on. And in a lot of ways, I kind of go after, kind of the dregs. What are the bugs I can fix? Can I solve some of these issues that they just don't want to spend time on? Or I'll go after technical debt. We recently had to do a thing where we wanted to change the font in all of our apps. And it's like, oh, that should be easy. Well, I was through 4 different apps, and I spent time doing that because I know it's just busy work for somebody. It's not fun, it's not interesting, and so I did that one for as an example. One of the ones I really ascribe to is I always make my time free. So like I never schedule myself into any sprint or assume that I'm going to actually contribute anything at all. And that way, if I don't, which sometimes is true because of other commitments, it's kind of a bonus as I go forward. So, and again, I'd love to hear what you guys think about this, but these are just some of my own thoughts. So,
can I ask a question on that?
Yeah.
If you don't put yourself into a sprint, as a lead, when you're doing, assume it's Scrum, you're doing a stand-up, what do you report on? So report on the stuff that you did, even though it's not sprint related, where you're...
Usually, or it's depending on what you have, you might be going to more than one sprint, or it's a lot about like what's relevant. And so I'll also in Scrum report on, I went to this meeting and I talked to these people and we decided this thing and this affects all you guys. And sometimes it's just reporting, and sometimes honestly I'll report on like weeks. So if I get some free time, I'm going to work on these Android tickets, and that'll literally be my Scrum report for who knows how long, and it has been before. So, and it's really just how your org is willing to deal with that. But that, I've done the opposite of that before, and it always goes down to flames. Oh, I'm going to spend 50% of my time programming for sure, so just bill me at like half a developer, and it's like, you program
you miss commitments.
Yeah, you program for 2 days, and you're like, oh, sorry guys, I was wrong, because you're running around after fires and, who knows what else. So that's worked better for me, but, your mileage may vary, obviously, and depends on what's.
Does your team, are they okay with that? I mean, did they hold you accountable in terms of what commitments were made and getting that sprint work done?
I think so, and I'll jump in and help with the sprint work if we're falling behind too, which is kind of one of the nice things.
It's priority change, right?
Yeah. And that's the big. Since my time's free, if suddenly I realize, we're supposed to have this thing done by Friday, I can now just jump in and help with it.
Right.
And I've absolutely done that a lot of times.
Sure. Because the team would have committed to it. You just said, hey, I'll help, and you'll get it done. So,
Yeah.
So maybe you can pull another story in later on.
Yeah, and we had one pretty recently as well where, we were pushing really hard to hit a date, and there was this other thing that was related to the project we were working on, but it wasn't actually, and it needed to be done for the project we were working on, but it wasn't actually any of the stories. It was like this kind of thing that came out of left field, and and now we also need to do this thing. And I just took that thing on myself, so I didn't affect the sprint at all, and everyone could just keep working on all their tasks and still hit their date, and I could do this other thing that was also really important, but not, kind of came from the side, if you will. And that actually worked really well. So, in a lot of ways, I kind of see myself as a fill in the pieces or the gaps wherever they are. And I think at this level, I think that makes a ton of sense, personally. So, jumping up a level, I think this one's really important. And when I was a director at my last company, we didn't write any production code, but I thought it was really important to not forget what you're doing. and I'll kind of talk more about that later, but I still, would listen in on code reviews, and I think that's an important one. At this level, and again, it depends on your organization, how much you have in there, but I tried really hard to stop actually trying to write production codes, fix real bugs, just try to be in the middle of things, and I started pushing more towards tools. So I wrote a bunch of tools at our last company too, like, I want to make our Jira instance talk to our Microsoft CRM instance. And I did some integrations and was able to get some, extra data and see some of our velocity stuff. And so I was still writing code and I was still staying current and feeling like I was contributing without actually, being in the middle of the world and making people feel like I was trying to do other stuff. So, dashboards. And then I think it's still important to, go to like the architecture meetings and the technical discussions and things like that. So then the next level up, and this one probably is, anything above a VP or higher, but I don't know. And I honestly never been at this level, but I think it's important to not lose perspective. And I was talking to Jeff, who was going to come. He's basically stopped writing code in his role, and so he was like, I'm kind of sad I couldn't come because I wanted to, he's like, am I making career suicide? And I said, well, probably.
It could be, unless you go get educated in something else.
Yeah, so I was like, I'm like, I didn't necessarily want to tell him that. That's kind of how I felt. I mean, I think it's important to stay somewhere. I think it's important to remember your job's not to be a programmer. That's especially, once you get to be a VP, or a CTO, I've looked at people I've known in those roles, and the ones that I really liked are ones where I looked at them and I could say, I can tell when you were a programmer, you were really good at it. And I can still see that somewhere in your past, you were this programmer. And the ones that have been really mediocre are the ones I look at and I say, I can never tell you ever got a computer science degree. I can't tell that about you at all. You've gone so business, MBA. So that's kind of my thought, don't forget your roots, don't stop knowing what you're talking about. Our current CTO is he'll get in there and he'll start throwing out he'll write something on the board and he has the notation for, I don't even remember what it is, but set theory and stuff. And I'm just like, this guy's smart, I can respect him. And that's important to me, as a developer, as a first level manager, to know that the people above me are not just I've been here longer than everybody else and that's why I'm in charge, but actually smart at what they do.
I can tell you from a recruiting perspective, I had lunch the other day with a manager of mine. He works for a company called Fun Tech. They were just purchased by another company. He's a software development manager. And he was saying, hey, I'm worried that we got purchased, that I might be out of a job if there's some overlap there. And he said, what does the job market look like for me? And I said, well, have you stayed developing. Have you done a lot of that? A little bit, a lot? He said, yeah, I'm very involved in that. I said, no problem.
Yeah.
You'll be just fine. If you want to stay marketable, absolutely critical.
So there you go. And I know for myself, it's one thing I've found is right now there's a wild dearth of developers in Utah. And any of you that are hiring or trying to hire, it seems like, the good ones just don't exist, and there's 1,000 mediocre ones. But one thing, but what I found is, I hired at my last job, I hired a first level manager, and I was shocked by how many really top quality candidates I felt like there were compared to how many developers that I had. And so in my mind it's like, man, if I don't stay technical, then I might, I'm not going to compete in that space. And also when I left that job, I went from a director back to an individual contributor, and I was able to do that because I had stayed technical.
Yeah.
And because I moved, companies, I went from a director to an individual contributor at the same salary. At a company that in my mind, like, oh, this has lots of room to grow, and I can, get back to a similar position soon, which I've, had some good success with here. So, but I was able to do that because I fought so hard to not just give it up, I guess. So, just to toot my own horn a lot.
You're good at that. Yeah.
It's all on video.
I know, right? So anyway, the one last thing, code on the side. Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I've never been a VP. I've never been a CTO.
When do you think they find time to do that?
I don't know. And so like
I look at our CTO and it just seems like he's
always
got stuff going.
So in this article, he talks about like, how do you actually spend time to do it? And I'll mention this one, but it's a Dr. Dobbs article. Let me get a little bit bigger. But he's like, failing strategies, sleep less, just read the headers, only know one thing, and then he's like, and I think a lot of it, this one is, I think, really important. I think if you're going to get serious about, I still want to have time in the code, just start scheduling meetings for yourself, like, put some time on your calendar. And I think that, especially, director and above level, I had days where I was, in meetings for 6 or 7 hours, and, it's like if I had an open spot on my calendar, somebody filled it up. And so I think, if you're serious about this, he talks about just, 8 hours of blocked per week makes an enormous difference. So even if it ends up getting double booked, even if you don't end up using it, 4 hours spent coding as a VP is quite a lot, actually, just to keep current. It's probably not.
You're going to suck at it.
Yeah, you are. But at least, it might be enough to, at least know what's current and what's still out there and keep your skills honed. And I don't know. I personally believe that all the best people are going to spend some time on the side doing something anyway. So I think that's important as well. But, I think this is, delegating, I don't know. There's some, and you guys can read these on your own time, but I don't know. Honestly, I don't. I worry, if and when I get to that point, like, I don't want to stop being technical. I don't want to stop, programming something, but it's like, I think about how much side programming I do now, and it's like almost nothing. And am I suddenly going to have all this like extra time and energy? And I know I'm not. So it's like, I don't know. You're a VP now, right?
That's right.
And then how do you,
And I have been for years. I
How-
haven't written commercial code in 15 years.
Yeah.
I've written code, but not commercial code. Yeah, I've got my own opinions, and I'm happy to share, but I just would want to throw out other questions first. But the one of them is that there's different kinds of problems you have to solve, and that's one thing. So the question is, as a leader in a company, the manager is one thing. Everybody, whenever you have people reporting to you, you have to manage the people. You have to work with the people. That's got to be your highest priority as a manager. But as a leader, you have to always be looking at the company and say, what is the biggest problem I have to solve right now? And if you're the only one that has to solve those problems and everybody else is cutting code or running, you have to do that.
Right.
You owe it to the company in that position to lead.
Right.
That's one question I think we all have to ask ourselves is the biggest problem that you need to get code out the door faster?
Right.
Then you better go do it. If the biggest problem is that your product management team sucks and you don't know what your customer's doing, you better go solve that problem, right? And as a leader, you really have to do that.
Right.
I guess the other one is I came into a career, I guess what you were talking about, Nick, and maybe the rest of you guys are in the same, you come to a career perspective where you say, am I going to pursue as a profession software leadership?
Right.
And leadership in a software company. And that was a turning point for me. I knew I could be a good developer.
Right.
And I would never be great because I'd worked with great developers before that have, you guys know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
that just have something that they're great, they're just faster at coming up with the answers than I was. But I had a feeling based on my heritage and who I'd worked with that I could be a great leader.
Right.
And I had to make that decision. I could not keep a foot in both camps.
Right.
And I guess that's what you're talking about, Nick, is that if you get to that point, you say, you know what? I want to be an ace developer that leads people. Then you have to, because that's what your passion is. I guess that's the third thing is you have to ask yourself
Right.
where when you leave the building every night and you feel like you've had a great day. What was it you were doing that day?
Right.
Was it going to meetings and trying to influence the CTO to go a good direction, or was it cutting code in your cube?
Right.
You know, and you have to stay true to the love. Otherwise, I think we've all seen it. I think we've all seen it when somebody's in a job
Yeah.
that they have no joy for anymore.
Yeah.
And anyway, those are the three questions that I think I was just
Well-
jotting here, but.
Well, and it's the same kind of thing, you know. I think, like I said, I think a lot of people go into management because they see that as their career path, but that's not their love.
It's not their love,
It's not their
exactly.
love. And so, I mean, did you meet Ethan before? Did you
Yeah.
overlap with him at least once?
Yeah.
So, and I mean, he is a classic example of that. He was a fantastic developer, you know, ended up in management, just based on how he was positioned, ended up as a director, and was found himself like, I don't have time to write code anymore, and he realized that that was his passion, that he missed it, and he said, okay, guys, I'm gonna go over here and be a developer. You guys need to fill that director position I just vacated, and honestly, they still haven't, by the way, which is kind of funny.
I think there's that balance though between compensation too, right?
Yeah.
And
And that's what the
where your
CTOs and
passion
VPs
lies.
have to fix.
Yeah, and that's something that I would argue is broken about it. And at a good company, and it's something we've been trying to lay out is, you know, you have this parallel track, and one's management and one's technical. And you have, you know, the ability to be on a technical track at the same level compensation-wise as a director or a VP.
VP.
Yeah, and honestly, and we've been building that into ours here, and I'm like super stoked about it. Because what you see like at our, you know, the last place I worked, it was like, you know, we had, you know, like junior or associate software engineer, or software engineer 1, 2, and 3, and that was it. And we basically here, you know, added a 5, 6, 7, 8, you know, just to have some sort of parity. And it's like, you know, a lot of people don't progress past 3, and that's fine. You know, there's plenty of room for, you know, senior software engineers in the world. But like the people who are serious about their career and really want to grow, like I've known some people, like we have one here who's, you know, would be like a level 5 or something, and he's fantastic. You know, he's not, you know, he's mid-30s, he's not that old, but he knows his stuff, and he has this mind for architecture that's phenomenal. You know, like, and like he would be a terrible manager, just the worst. But like as an architect, fantastic. You know.
Would you argue that there's more risk though in the management track?
Yeah.
And so would
Yeah.
there be some compensation around that just because of the extra risk that an individual would take by becoming a manager?
Maybe. I mean, that's kind of for your own board to decide, I guess.
Well, there's risk in that, I think, what's your name again?
Jeff.
Jeff, what Jeff was saying that, I just finished an article on LinkedIn about within 25 miles of here, there's 1,000 software jobs open.
Right.
Yeah.
And in that same 25-mile radius, there's like 20 manager jobs. So it's the
Right.
this pool
Yeah.
down to the this pool,
Yeah.
right? So that's the career risk.
Yes.
But if you were gonna ask, I mean, I talked to a lot of people, I really try to network a lot, and they're panicked right now about needing leaders, software leaders to come in and say, help me grow the organization, help me scale up,
Well,
you know, all these things, and that's a leadership
This
aspect.
position in structure that Ethan vacated, they looked around their org and said, well, there's nobody here to do it, and nobody wanted to, and so they posted it, and they couldn't find anybody, and I think I just heard they're actually gonna turn it into a VP position, just
Yeah.
to try and entice
It's
somebody
true.
with a little
It's
bit
true,
more money.
because they called me.
That's what I'm saying, right? So,
And that's not too far from where you are right now.
Right.
so, yeah, but at the same time, I think it's really important to not ever push people into management just because they feel like that's where they have to go to grow their career.
Career or compensation.
Or
some retarded
compensation,
like that.
or like, if I'm not in management by the time I'm 40, it's, I'm gonna be a dinosaur and I can't be a really fantastic, senior engineer at the 60 or something like
Well,
that.
let me throw that one out there for all you, because you know Shane Kelly, right?
I do.
Yeah, and Shane was at In Contact as a manager that coded, right? And then he was recruited to NetSteps. You guys know, I don't even know if they're still in business, to be a VP.
They're not.
I've heard the
Business.
company, but
Okay. He was recruited to be VP. And
Back.
he hated it
Right.
because he felt like he was dealing with politics, not code. He felt like he was having to manage up rather than work with the team, all these things that sucked. And he came to In Contact right before I did, and he's like, well, the reality is the negative, even though I was getting paid more, the negatives were so acerbic to me, and the fact that I could not code, I lost joy in his life. So he said, I just want to go forever writing code. So the one of the things I did when I got there is say, there is that cap, like Nick, you're talking about the level 3, it was a little higher.
Yeah.
I mean, you could be making like $150,000 a year, $160,000 a year as an individual contributor, but you were missing the director and VP level.
right.
So we created those, but the idea is that even if you're a distinguished engineer, that's what we call them,
Uh-huh.
you needed to be writing code.
Right.
You couldn't be well, for lack of a better word, the ivory tower dictator
Right.
that just is the smart guy that everybody has to bow to before they can write code. I've seen those before. We had them at Novell. It sucked. But it's almost like that trade-off. If you're going to commit to code, commit to it. But at some point in the manager track, you're going to have to, go back to your Venn diagrams.
Mhm.
There's at some point you're going to have to make the shift that your skills in leadership and people and things like that have to be, what is it, like the director or the VP level. You have to be saying, you know what, the value I'm providing to the company at that point has to be significant enough. You have to receive as much joy from doing that job as you did from coding, or it's not the right, for me anyway, it's not the right step.
Well, and it's been interesting, like talking to Ethan and Jeff, because I look at Ethan and Jeff as the two extremes. One of them decided, I don't want to write code anymore because I really get so much joy out of being a manager that if I stop writing code, that's fine. And Ethan, who said, I give up on management because I get so much joy out of programming. And then me, honestly, I'm really solidly in the middle. Like, I love programming. I could go full architecture track and I'd probably love it. I could go full management track and probably love it. And so I've been riding the fence for a really long time now of like, which one do I want to do? Do I just want to stay at like management level forever? And I'm still, even now, like, lately I've been saying, okay, I want to ride management track. But, am I still going to feel that way in 2 years? The next time I get back into a director job, am I going to get 2 years into that and be like, I miss the code too much? Like, I don't know. I don't know.
I don't want to talk anymore.
So, I don't know.
To me, there's a point where you can find that success, but you just can't keep your finger, you can't stay up to date on everything because
Yeah.
every stack evolves.
Yeah.
And then there's the point when you move to a new job,
Yeah.
and which changes things. I think you mentioned that in your intro.
And
Have you guys ever done that before? Moved to a new job as a manager?
I haven't.
Have you done that? You have.
Yeah.
What's your take, moving over as a manager?
Everything is different. The same. The stacks are different, and the way how the organization it's managed, it's way different. The first time that I got into the management positions, I thought that everything was based on the book, but I found out that everyone really had their own dictatorship. You say?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Every
Yeah,
king rules the kingdom differently.
Yeah, I moved to 3 different companies with different management positions, and everyone was different, regardless of the size of the organization. So, yeah.
I'm actually scared to do it. Like, I'm not gonna lie. I mean, but in some ways, it's. I think it would be easier because it's actually kind of hard to go from being a peer to somebody to being their manager, which I've now done a couple of times. And in some ways, like people I've hired since I've become a manager, those are always easier people to deal with because you're just, in their eyes, they're always their manager. But I've still got people on my team now who we were peers, and honestly, for a long time, they were making significantly more money than I was as peers.
Yeah.
They don't know that, but I do. So maybe they know it now. Not that anybody watches these videos.
It's always the case.
You
I've always had people making more money than me reporting to me.
Yeah, and that's that's fine. I don't, it doesn't bother me or anything. They're good developers, so. But it's just so, I don't know. Kind of getting off topic there, but.
Well, let me throw out the other question on this regard, which is well, I guess it's related to what you were saying. Some people your peers, and then other people you hired in, is the level of trust. I mean, if you, I don't know if you guys have read the Speed of Trust or some of those trust books, but the idea of if you're going into the code of the team that you manage, is it increasing trust or is it eroding trust?
Yeah.
Is it, well, Nick or Steve or somebody doesn't trust? Because I have to admit, I'll just say it now, I'm a little more hands-on than I used to be.
Yeah.
Novel's style, to Jorge's point, was once you get to the director VP level, you don't work day to day with the teams. You work with your peers and everything like that. And that doesn't work in smaller companies. And frankly, I hated it. I felt like I sucked at it. So
Yeah.
anyway, like a year ago, I'm like, I'm going to help the QA team and I'm going to try to find bugs. I was just really passionate about our new user interface. So I would get in there and when we were doing a call center sim, I would get in there and I'd start testing. And I had told the manager of the QA team my intent. My intent was to help and to get to know the product at a deeper level and things like that. But that intent did not spread to the rest of the team.
Right.
So the other QA people on the team that were in that simulation were trying it, thought is Townsend doesn't trust us, doesn't actually think that we can test this appropriately, so he's in here mucking around.
Right.
And so I guess the question I would throw out is, what is the level of trust that you find with your team? Does it erode trust or build trust when you're in cutting code with teams or beside your team or however you want to say it?
And that one of these articles I know kind of got into that a little bit of like, are you really adding value? And that was kind of the idea, related to that as well of, because I've been in that line too, where I worked for a guy, he was the director, and it's like, he would like just decide we were doing something else and he'd go like write some code and be like, this is what we're using now. And we're like, but that's not what any of us talked about.
Right.
And it came off really weird and nobody really liked it. It's like, just stay on the management side.
Get out of the way.
Yeah. And that's a good point. And I know for myself, I mean, as I've, when I've been promoted, one of the things I've really tried really hard to do is, part of why I've been promoted is I established myself as a really strong programmer. And that's made it easier because when I become a manager, it's like I already had respect from the people that I was managing before as being a good programmer. So it's like, even when I go monkey in areas that I necessarily didn't do before. So it's like, I did a lot of web here before I became a manager and did quite a bit of Android, and then the Android guys I hired were after I started doing Android, but I've got a couple of iOS guys. And so, recently I was monkeying in the iOS code, and I think that they're like, oh, well, he's at least smart, so he can do this, even though I hadn't normally been in there. I think that's what they thought, but like, now I'm super worried, like, no, I really like you guys, but I was, I was trying to do, some technical debt stuff that I was like, this is too menial for you, I'll go do it, but.
Oh, I love it.
I don't know. Anyway, so that's some good topics. So I just want to introduce some of these articles that I came across when I was researching this. So this is this Dr. Dobbs article, and the articles were very much in favor of you need to spend time coding for sure, no matter what you do, which is an interesting thing that, and I think we're kind of on the same page as, but then how do you really do it? especially as you get farther up the company. So, I mean, he kind of brings up some reasons why you need to definitely spend some time in the code. And I think some of these are really important. You know, if you aren't technical enough to call, garbage on an estimate, I think is an important one. You know, that estimate just definitely seems too big, and I've seen people get so far removed from the code that their perception of how big something really should be gets really far out. And just an understanding of technical debt, I think, is actually important as a manager, because I look at that when you have resource conversations with like product and marketing or sales, and you build a roadmap. Well, they're not going to say, oh, well, we need to go and upgrade our Mongo instance, and I think it's important as a manager to know that. And that was something I actually liked from that. But anyway, this article had some interesting stuff in it. These are kind of his ideas on why you should do it, and this was also the article that had some of the strategies on when to do it and how not to do it. I liked this one. I didn't put it in my slides, but I think that's important to know, because it's probably really easy, especially if you get farther up the management chain, to not really write any code. But I actually think it's important to be able to look at a piece of code and have some idea of what it does. That's my own personal belief, but it's helped me in a lot of instances. I couldn't necessarily write any Objective-C, but I could at least tell you what the Objective-C code is doing most of the time. So anyway,
I like his final tips. Those are some good things.
Yeah, no, I thought so too.
You should be able to build the product you manage,
Yeah,
Right.
the whole thing.
yeah,
I was in this position where I was the programmer's manager, and I was doing some coding, but then the CEO retired, and they put a general manager. And this general manager, he was just graduated from a MBA, and he pretty much started to follow the rules. And he told me, don't do programming anymore, just rely on all your developers. Those developers should do the thing. I went in that direction for a whole year, and then this guy got replaced. The new CEO that came in, he said, "What are you doing, Jorge? Do you really fit in here? Because you seem like you do nothing." and it was kind of the truth, because I wasn't doing programming.
yeah.
I didn't really understand the code, and I knew the application because I had all these architectural meetings, and I was giving them the directions
Yeah.
and the user interfaces and everything, how it should look, but they didn't know anything underneath. And when we started to have at the Bible company these meetings about the product, how it worked, I didn't have any answer.
Yeah.
So yeah, I totally support to do programming, no matter what.
So I talked to, when I was at this Angular conference, there's a guy at Google who's like over, kind of the Angular team. And Angular is this massive product now, and everybody uses it, and it's a big deal. And I've looked at his like LinkedIn profile, and it's like, that's just one of the teams he's over, but he's always seems like he's in the middle of it. And I honestly thought he was writing part of Angular.
Right.
And so I actually cornered him, and I was like, how what do you do? He's like, and I'm like, are you still writing tons of code? He's like, I haven't written code in 10 years. That's what he said. And I'm just like, what do you do? And he's just like, I stay informed. And he's like, I go out of my way to stay informed. I ask the dumb questions. I ask him a second time. I ask him a third time until I know how everything works and where the pieces are missing, even though I'm not writing any code. And I was like, that's right. I was like, that's fantastic. And honestly, I'll bet he could explain to you some just crazy architectural pieces of that, even though he's never been involved with it. Like I said, I honestly thought he was a core contributor to the project. I honestly did. So definitely somebody to kind of look up to. So this next article, he says that some small percentage, and then he kind of throws this quote out there: your primary job is to do the things that individual programmers cannot do. I'm not sure I had anything else from that one, but that's he had some good points in here, that quote there. But he said, should managers code? And he said it depends on what you are managing. And so his general philosophy was, if you're exclusively a manager of software developers, then yes, you should probably still know how to code and have a programming background. And then he kind of gets into, okay, well, if you transition more into project manager, then well, it gets a little trickier. And I don't know about you guys, but I've never known a technical project or product manager. And I've always wished that I would.
Got one right now.
Do you?
He's a developer and switched.
How is that?
Yeah, sometimes it's good, and sometimes it's not so good.
I could see that.
Because he'll pull up code and say,
Yeah.
no, it works like this, and we're like, why are you in the code? So,
Yeah.
it's a different paradigm.
It's a trust thing too.
I think it is. I think it is, because that's I think trust is a big one, you know. Kind of going a little bit off topic here, but one of the things I've really struggled with is I've found, you know, a lot of people don't trust other people, and so inside of a company, and a lot of it's because they don't really understand what is all involved, and they think they do. They're like, oh, I see this, you know, the part of your job that's actually presented to me, and that's, you know, your whole job in my mind. So it's like, I was talking to a guy who does a lot of our data analytics, and he's just like, well, I did this stuff, you know, at this other big company that's a name you've heard of, and, you know, it was like this other way. And I'm like, yeah, but they don't have any of these requirements or these requirements. And it was like, he just, you know, he was trying to tell me, like, this should only take 3 days. And I'm just like, no, don't estimate for me. You know,
That is the problem.
and a lot of it was like, and then it felt like he honestly just didn't trust me. You know, like, he didn't trust that I knew enough about what I was talking about. And he's really smart at the things that he's actually hired for and his job is for, but it's like, you know, I understand you've worked with developers a lot, but you're not actually a developer. And it's like I had my product manager tell me, like, well, QA should just do this thing in this other way, and then they'll be done testing faster. And I'm like, don't tell QA how to QA. Don't tell me how to program, and I won't tell you how to prioritize the product line. Like, you know, we have to trust each other. Sorry, that was my aside, but I'm really.
So you guys, I gotta take off.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
But I get really excited about that. So the rends and repos one I actually quite liked. He kind of says, you know, you really do need to be coding. And he actually had some good little points as well. But he kind of recommend these as kind of high level, is that you should, you know, be able to build the development environment, which I actually think is a big one. And I would recommend, even if you don't write code, I actually think that's nice to be able to do. And I try, you know, where I have like 3 or 4 products that I actually deal with, you know, and I don't write iOS code, I like to still be able to like build the app and put it on my phone and play with it. And then the second one I think is a lot of, you know, back to like Brad Green from Angular, you know, knowing how things work, what the pieces are. The third one is, and he's really funny about that feature thing. What does he say? Own a feature. He says, you know, but this is gonna make you cringe. I'm still cringing. Somebody's already yelling at me. Management or owning a feature? So I think you should read the article. It's got some good points in there, but it's, you know, it can be a tricky one to do sometimes, I think. And then test scripts, you know, and that kind of goes back to where I've seen success in the past is around, you know, tools and, you know, things that aren't necessarily production code, but still related to what you're building and what you're doing. I think is important. This article is really like back and forth, and you can kind of read through this one. I don't know, it doesn't have any visual hierarchy, which drives me crazy. Like, it's just a big wall of text. But it's some good points around, like, you know, you really should write code, but how are you ever going to have time to write code? But really, you need to be technical. But like, then you're a bad manager if you're so technical. And I think that's ultimately, you know, the issue we're all talking about the whole time. So I'm trying to remember if there was anything interesting on this one. Oh yeah, this was from this one, but you know, you can read these, but. It's a lot of the same thing we've been talking about already. And I think, you know, on that last one, you know, if really coding makes the satisfaction of your job go up, I'm going to argue, you know, are you on the right curve? or in quite honestly, you know, whereas I also believe it's quite reasonable for somebody to be like a level 3 engineer forever, there's nothing wrong with being a technical lead or a team manager. You know, that might be the right position for somebody because they can stay in the code, they can have some management responsibilities. Not everybody.
As long as you can feel good at the family reunion.
Yeah.
Telling people, this is what I do.
I think, I mean, quite honestly, not everyone
It's
needs
true.
to be a CTO, not everyone needs to be a distinguished architect, and not everyone will be.
Right.
And so, you know, I think it's important, you know, as people that we kind of understand, you know, where we're going. I think that's in my slides. So, anyway.
I can tell you, I mean, it's true about the
It
family
is.
reunion
It
thing. I
is.
mean, for Indian developers, there was a tremendous push for hierarchical growth before they got married, right?
Right.
So there was that familiar pressure. Around in Utah, there's been that as well. Well, you know, you go to the family reunion and your brother-in-law is now the CTO of this company, and you've been a manager for a pretty long time, you know?
Yeah.
And are you going to be able to say, yeah, and that's what I like about it, and we're really the ones that get our jobs done. And by the way, he's not really a CTO; he's just the only guy at that company, you know. And, you know, and can you feel good about that? And when you're telling your mom and dad and your brothers and sisters, are you going to ashamed.
Right. I agree. But anyway, any other thoughts or feelings? What do you think? How much code are you writing now?
It's been mandated,
Okay.
50%,
Oh.
but some weeks I hit that, some days I don't come any close.
Yeah.
So,
I've been.
You're a frontline manager or director now? What do
I
you
am a
work
team
for?
lead,
Team
a
lead.
scrum master,
Scrum
which is
master,
what I
team
threw
lead.
out at a family reunion recently. They're like, wow, that sounds cool.
Right, exactly.
Sit up and knock and everyone's excited.
A scrum master.
I don't know. Maybe you guys have fancier families than I do. It's like, you're a software engineering manager? Whoa, that's
Yeah, see, that's
you know,
awesome.
you're talking to your auto mechanic, you know, the guy who's in the call center, and you know, like I'm doing okay. So. You're like, oh, you're not a doctor? Oh.
I have a family full of teachers, so they think I'm terrible. But I haven't done something that's meaningful.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're changing lives and I'm just recruiting, so.
Which changes lives.
I try and convince them, but they're
I'll bet-
not sold.
I'll bet some of the people you found jobs for, their lives have been changed significantly. So.
Hopefully.
I guess the only other thing that crosses my mind in this whole thing is the expectations of the boss and developing a skill for taking over a team.
Mhm.
I don't mean taking over. You're going to move. I guess what I'm saying, you're going to move
Right.
career. You're going to shift to a different company. It sounds like you've done it 3 times, Nick. And there is a point at which your leadership skill and your influence has to come from somewhere else inside you rather than being an expert in the code. Because
Right.
there's going to be
That's right.
everybody else on your team
Yeah.
is going to be better than you, but you've been asked to come lead. And
Right.
that's a skill in and of itself. And I could give you all the answers if you want to do one of those interviews and give you the answers to get the job. But
Right.
it's the same thing, I guess, the Google guys, you gotta be really good at asking questions, inspiring trust as you listen to the answers, and remember that, well, some of my statements come across negative, but the manager is gonna have to tax the team in order to be able to lead. And that's one of the things that still bugs me. It's against my instinct. It's like, in order to lead, I need to know what you guys are doing, but we're at crunch time right now, so I'm not gonna tax you right now. I'm not gonna give you the steep tax.
Right.
You guys just do your thing, but I'm gonna come back and you're gonna have to educate me because my job is to lead, and I can't
Right.
lead if I don't know the details of what's going on. And that grates against me.
Yeah.
But in order to lead, you gotta ask questions, you gotta take people's time in order to stay in, because the cheap way, what feels like the cheap way, is just go in the code and find out for yourself without talking to people.
Right.
I don't know, it comes across negative, but if you do it in the right way, it can really help.
Well, and I've actually found, if I go to people and it's like, and how I approach it is like, you're the expert of this thing, and I need to know about this thing that you're the expert of. And I don't exactly say those words, but like I try to present that that's how I'm approaching this conversation. And people just like, a good programmer loves to tell you about their stuff, right? And he'll be like, oh yeah, it works like this, and he did this other thing, and I had this really great idea. And, and I try to encourage that to the point where I've had, 3 or 4 different people on my team just literally come into my office, look at this thing I just did, and they'll tell me all about it. And that's been, a really positive thing, because like, I really respect you, I appreciate what you do, and I know you're good at your job.
Yeah.
So.
And then you could go home at the end of the day and say, hey, I was there to give somebody positive feedback,
Yeah.
and gave them a good day.
Yeah.
That's great.
Cool. So.